UConn to the Big 12. We learned a whole lot this weekend. Let's give you even more. This is a Locked On UConn, Locked On Big 12 crossover.
You are Locked On Big 12, your daily podcast on the Big 12 Conference. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Happy Tuesday, everybody. Welcome to Locked On Big 12 and a Locked On UConn crossover. Thank you for making these two shows your first listen every single day. I'm Drake Toll from America's #1 Big 12 podcast, Locked On Big 12. That's Mark Zanetto, the smartest man in the world from Locked On UConn. Today, we're going to touch on an update from Ross Dellinger, who spoke with Mark, as well as what if the Big 12 presidents don't vote in UConn, and who needs this more? Who does this benefit more? Mark, off the start here, before we even get to your conversation with Ross that we've already teed up, good job. Guys, dude,
thank you.
What a gratifying 72 hours after you bring this bombshell statement on the show, and you were right.
Yeah, and I said this to I have a UConn chat, as I'm sure you have a Big 12 chat. And I remember literally saying the words, when I went on the Big 12 show, I was uneasy about talking about this because this is me going out on a limb and trusting someone who I know and I know pretty well, but I've never met this person in person. I don't know them like they're a friend. It's an acquaintance. It's an acquaintance of a friend that's involved in these negotiations. I can't say more than that. So they are privy to information, and he just so happened to send it to me. And I got a tip. The only reason why I dug this up is I got a tip from a UConn fan who said, "Hey, this may be a good segment for your podcast. You think?" And so I won't shout him out because I don't know how, if he would like that. But anyway, he knows who he is. He sent me a DM, and that's how the train got rolling.
Wow. Well, I sitting at 3 p.m. and get that Ross Dellinger tweet update. I was like, no way. No, after 48 hours of people berating you.
And you, by the way.
We kept all of the receipts. We won't bring them up, but they're there. And now you've had a conversation with Ross Dellinger. What is the update that maybe the most level-headed and well-informed expansion journalist has on this topic?
No, it was great. First off, thank you to Ross for coming on. So if he watches this somehow, I really appreciate his time. No, the level-headed description is spot on. His comments are essentially that there is nothing imminent. And so that's probably the only thing that I would say I got wrong on this story. I will own anything that I ever get wrong. So he is, but it's a lot closer than I think anyone ever thought it was on last Tuesday. And what I mean by that is right now it's really up to Brett Yormark and his ability to sell UConn as this next best thing for the Big 12, whether it's the New York, Massachusetts, Boston, New Jersey, tri-state area, his roots essentially, whether it's the ability to bring the best women's basketball program of all time. And the thing that I think is the most kind of telling of all of this is what Ross and I talked about is that there's a net neutral aspect to the football program. You don't have to give any revenue share to UConn football because they won't actually be a part of the conference until 2031. So you're almost playing with house money, if you will. And I think that is the biggest selling point right now. And we'll talk about who needs more of this. Obviously, you're leading the show, but yeah, Ross was great. He kind of, it'll come out tomorrow morning. You guys can check it out. It was a surreal moment to ask him these questions because he's been working on this for what, a year?
Yeah, if not more. And also, if you're watching this show right now, that show is out. You can get that right now. Ross Dellinger with Mark Zanetto and Locked On UConn,
we're taping.
Wherever you get your podcasts and on YouTube. Mark, quickly, before we get into the voting and all of that, any word on if there is someone waiting in the wings to join UConn in this endeavor?
No, I mean, the only speculation right now is Gonzaga and then the remaining Pac-2, that are kind of just dangling out there. But I don't feel like there's the urgency of that. I think the reason why UConn is the urgency on this is because of, like we talked about, the net neutral budget-wise, the ability to add a huge basketball brand and bring some value that way, without kind of messing anything up on the football side. I don't think the timing of adding football, and this is Ross's words, if we're going back to Ross Dellinger, that there are probably some programs who don't think the timing of that is right. So right now it's pretty much UConn or nothing. And listen, things change really quickly. The big, like we talked about this on the show. The Big Ten was not looking to expand, and then Oregon came calling, and people like Fox added more money to the deal, and boom, it was done. So will there be a entity like ESPN or Fox that adds more money to this deal to kind of sweeten the ESPN the UConn pot? I don't know yet. We'll find out.
Coming up, what if Big 12 presidents vote against this, and should they? This is Locked On Big 12 and Locked On UConn, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Today's episode is brought to you by 5 Hour Energy. Sometimes I get tired, and when I do get tired, I use 5 Hour Energy. The reason is it's an immediate energy boost for you as you go about your day after lunch or tackling a to-do list or before your workout. Keep yourself energized with zero sugar, and you have flavors like watermelon, berry, a flavor for everyone, and it is a brand of hardworking people that's about to give you a really good deal. You can use my promo code LOCKEDONCFB to receive 20% off your order at 5hourenergy.com. That's the number 5hourenergy.com. The offer is only valid until September 30th on one order and cannot be used with other promotions. The code is not good on subscription orders, but code LOCKEDONCOLLEGE, make it LOCKEDONCFB, will give you 20% off of your order at 5hourenergy.com. You go there today. Mark Zanetto of Locked On UConn, following your conversation with Ross Dellinger, what if the Big 12 presidents vote against it? What is it going to take? Where do they sit? Do we know how the Big 12 feels after Brett Yormark met with the university presidents that make it matter?
So from what I've heard, we have about 6 to 8 teams that are yeses. That would be absolute yeses without almost worrying about the presentation. I feel like I think the presentations and the numbers and the delays of funding for football and all the revenue sharing that goes into that is going to be about the 8 teams or potentially 4 teams that are 6 teams that are on the fence. And so Ross said he feels like there's about 2 to 4 teams that are just hard nose and the rest are on the fence. So if you have 8 yeses, listen, I haven't been following, I'll be honest with you guys, I haven't been following the expansion with UConn and the Big 12 from the start. So maybe this has gone from, and the reason why this is gaining momentum is because in the beginning, there was only 4 teams that were like, yeah, we'll do this. Right. And now there's 8. And we're kind of creeping towards that magic number of 12. I think 3 days ago, I was told this is going to happen. They have 12 votes. Now it's hemming and hawing and going, more like 8 or 9. So that's what I'm concerned about, is that they don't get the votes. And then I don't think UConn has egg on their face. Yeah. But I think that because I feel like the fan base is so split on this. Like I told you pre-show, I think about 60% of the UConn fans are going to go, thank God if we don't get in. They just have the AAC and the love of the nostalgic Big East in their blood. And so the football is, even though it's a lifeblood of most college athletics, kind of isn't for UConn. So that's the interesting rub. I think it's just more of an embarrassment thing. I'll be honest with you. Mark,
the idea that Brett Yormark would bring this to the table and that the Big 12 presidents wouldn't trust a guy who has led them so valiantly through realignment is something that's foreign to me. I can't see where the Big 12 presidents would say, based on Yormark's track record, no, we're not taking this pitch. Why? Do you see a reason that the Big 12 shouldn't allow UConn in?
That's what makes it different. I feel like you're right on that, because he has done such a good job of making sure that they have survival, and that also that it's thriving, that it's not just, hey, we're just hanging on and we're going to go grab no disrespect to the ACC. We're going to go grab SMU and, California and all these teams that, no one really cares about. And because there's a, you can make an argument that no one cares about UConn football, but there's a ton of people that care about UConn athletics in the Northeast. UConn Nation is nationwide, and the UConn football is a sleeping giant that can be built up. It was in a listen. It's been in a Fiesta Bowl. Can you say that about Vanderbilt in the SEC? Can you say that about Kentucky in the SEC? I mean, I'm just saying, like, there are teams that are playing big time college football right now that haven't had even the recent bowl success from a BCS level. When we're talking about that world that UConn has had recently, and I don't see them getting this and also having it leaked all over national media for them to just say, oh, we're just going to wait on this. We're going to take like 6 more months and figure this out. I just don't see that happening.
I don't either. And the Big 12, in the way that it's moved in realignment, it goes quick. We've been through this process with 8 new teams in the conference, so we know what it looks like. Mark, from the UConn perspective, though, if the university presidents do eventually say no, you already said there's not really an egg on your face. You made a push here, and if you don't get it, you're still a Big East basketball school, and there are still TV deals there. What is the future for the Huskies? You mentioned the fan base. They're not the ones that drive the revenue. What does this actually do if it doesn't work out for UConn?
If it doesn't work out for UConn, I think the only other feasible way for them to be a part of I wouldn't even say the Power Four, because they probably wouldn't get another chance with the Big 12. Nor would they want to go down that road again, being spurned not once but twice. I think what would end up happening is whoever the ACC does not lose, or when the ACC implodes, I think whatever that looks like could be a new kind of football conference that is added. That's kind of I want to call it a subdivision. It could end up being a subdivision, but just under that Power Four where there's some revenue share, but it's not at that same level as being in the Big 12 or the Big 10 or the SEC. So, because eventually it's going to be a Big 3. Let's just be honest, right? And it could end up being just super conferences, right?
Yeah.
So I think that's where they go, or the lesser of two evils. And I think there would be plenty of UConn fans that would like this, to just essentially say, okay, football, you are basically banished, and you are going to the MAC with UMass and playing, meaningless football essentially, which doesn't make sense to me because they've made these investments, the NIL, the Jim Moras, the defensive coordinator from Mississippi State, who I completely forget his name off the top of my head. But I mean, you don't get defensive coordinators from the SEC if you want to play 1AA or FCS football. It just doesn't happen. And yeah, it would make no sense to me if they decided to go that route.
Mark, quickly before we get into who needs this more, did Dellinger give you any hint of whether or not he thought this would be a positive move for either party?
Yeah, I asked him that. I actually asked him the question: if you were UConn, would you do this? Is this something that you would do? And he said, yeah, because I mean, football drives the engine, right? It's the engine of college athletics, whether you like it or not. And with the revenue sharing that's coming down with the House bill that's passed and is going into effect next year, who knows what that's going to look. He also talked about there's always a next thing, and that to me is so important to talk about, which is there's maybe these guys are going to start getting paid by the school even more. Are they going to have collective bargaining? Are they going to be paid employees? What's that going to look like from college athletics? And if you're left, this is what I mean, and this is what I want UConn fans to understand. When we say things like you're left behind, it doesn't mean that we have a terrible basketball program and that I hate UConn basketball. It means that left behind means Dan Hurley's in his 50s. He's not always going to be there. 20 years from now, he's probably not going to be coaching UConn. And you have to have a football program that is going to feed that basketball program more and more and more, and the baseball program and all the other things that you love about UConn.
Coming up, this matters for which party the most on Locked On Big 12 and Locked On UConn, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Today's show is brought to you by one of our newest sponsors here at Locked On, Ultimate College Football HC. Locked On Big 12, Locked On UConn fans, you can take a moment to give a heads up on a brand new mobile game that I think you're going to love, Ultimate College Football HC. It's a simulation game where you get to go in and be the head coach of a college football program like UConn or Texas Tech or Florida or Florida State, from recruiting players to hiring coaching staff to even calling plays. Your strategy will determine the success of your football season and shape the future legacy of your program. Ultimate College Football HC is completely free. No ads. 100% playable offline. You can play on the go as well. Locked On CFB is your promo code. If you go on right now and use code Locked On CFB, all caps, inside the game store, you'll receive a free bonus to your program. Make sure to take advantage of this perk at ultimate-cfb.com or look it up on the app stores. Ultimate College Football HC. Download it today. Mark Zanetto, Locked on UConn, to wrap up this conversation about these two parties, the Big 12, the University of Connecticut. Who needs this more? Who is this more important to if this move goes through?
I think it's more important to UConn in the long term. And I think the short term, I think it benefits the Big 12 in the short term because clearly they don't have to pay UConn any revenue share on the football side. Remember,
Bingo.
budget neutral. So it's clearly a long-term play for UConn that they need this more. Short term, the Big 12 needs it more because Yormark is interested in having the basketball super conference. And when you add the best program in college basketball, that happens overnight. And you add the greatest women's basketball program of all time. So, and I can say that unequivocally because they've won 11 titles, and I don't think anyone's close to even double digits. So, it's one of those things where that's cut and dry. Long term, it's great for UConn. Short term, it's fantastic for the Big 12.
In the next 10 years, I think this matters, and Big 12 fans will probably disagree. That fan in Wichita Falls, Texas, who grew up rooting for TCU might disagree. This is better for the Big 12 because of the conversation it's opening up with Fox and because of the conversation it's opening up with ESPN. It's no longer a, hey, what could we do? What can the Big 12 do with these 16 schools? Now it's, what more can you give us? If we have decided to add UConn or Gonzaga, Washington State, NC State, Miami, Louisville, what more can we do as a conference to expand further, not just in football, but in basketball as well, to build more revenue? And those TV contracts have longevity. Those are 10-year contracts, 10-plus year contracts when they're signed. If the Big 12 wants to negotiate that, having a piece like UConn and knowing that Fox and ESPN are in the war room as those conversations are going gives you an instant key to say, hey, we're not just willing to negotiate this next deal on 16 teams. We're willing to do it with expansion products as well. And maybe to change the question just a bit, Mark, I want to see if it varies your answer. Who would this, if it falls through, is it, I don't know if it's catastrophic for either, but who walks away more sad?
I think UConn administrators walk away more sad, and it's slightly more sad than maybe Brett Yormark,
who seems very excited by this, by the way.
I mean, of course, I think because he wants it, and if Brett's watching, I appreciate you, man. Bring us home. I'm excited. I would be excited for it because I truly believe that UConn is making the investments to make football great, and I do feel like obviously our basketball program is the best in the country, without it, with bar none. So. You add, I think that's just the bottom line, is that it would be kind of like a 60-40 split on sadness. If you know what I mean.
I wouldn't be happy. I think this is a move that benefits the Big 12 ultimately, benefits both, but benefits the Big 12 ultimately enough that the university presidents should make it. And if you don't get UConn, now you're lacking. You don't have to pay for football yet.
Yeah,
you don't have to.
Let me ask you this question, Drake, because there's a lot of new teams in the Big 12, but like, and people are going to think I'm just saying this just to kind of make fun of one team, and I'm just going to use it because I've said on my show that I think a UConn Kansas conference home at home, if they did that, or they played once a year, it would be the best college basketball game of the year. And then you have the Dan Hurley versus Bobby Hurley, Arizona State UConn game. That could be prime time Fox. They could play it up. They could have a college game day there. I mean, there's the possibilities are endless in basketball. But who does the Big 12, like Kansas fans, whose football program is not that great? I know they make money. Think they are saying that UConn would be 1-11 in the Big 12 perennially. I mean, I'm just saying it's the pot calling the kettle black. There were some bad football in the Big 12 for years. And it's gotten a lot better thanks to Brett Yormark and his ability to bring quality teams in. So if he thinks UConn can get to that level of at least being competitive with these Big 12 schools, you got to trust him and go with it. That's all I have to say.
the last 2 decades, we haven't seen schools like Kansas or Texas Tech be at the pinnacle. Kansas has one, BCS bowl appearance, but I look at Iowa State, kind of the same thing. You say, hey, you've never won double-digit games. There are programs here that just haven't done it at the highest level. So to say that UConn can't would be buffoonery, to put it nicely, for those schools. And what I would say to those people is, Mark, which school, which university in the country has won a combined 16 national championships since 1999?
You can see some of the banners on my wall behind me. So that would be UConn.
Yeah. And which school has had 3 men's head coaches take them to national championships in that span and win those championships? Also, UConn, 5 men's championships. So I made this point on my show. This would be silly and stupid if it was, hey, Oakland made a great run at the tournament last year.
Sure.
What if, we could trust them to, or even some of these mid-tiers. Oh, Wichita State was good for a decade. What if they come in? No, we're talking about a school that amongst multiple head coaches is winning national championships because they have that kind of investment in college basketball and because they have that kind of culture for the last 25 years. To me, that kind of staying power is something the Big 12 can hang its hat on and bring in without football really mattering right now. Because again, till 2031, it's a completely moot point.
Yeah, I agree. And I'd be remiss, and I've if I didn't correct you on one thing, we have 17 total championships with 6 with the men and 11 with the women in basketball. No, I mean, it's crazy. It's because this banner went obsolete last year. I had to bring it off the yard and I put a new one up. So, it's one of those things where you're right. There's a commitment to excellence at UConn. It also would be, I mean, I know we're not talking about academics, but at UConn's academics would easily be in the top 2, 1, maybe
Mark, we don't need to talk education here. You're going to be A-okay in that conversation in the Big 12 conference. Mark, before we get out of here, where can folks find more of your work, including that show with Ross Dellinger?
Yeah, no, check out Locked On UConn on YouTube and wherever you get your podcasts. I will also tweet it out at Mark Zanetto CBB, and then also at Locked On UConn on X, formerly Twitter.
Pleasure as always. This has been a crossover with Locked On Big 12 and Locked On UConn. This has been and always will be Locked On. Thanks for making it your first listen every single day. UConn and Dose Grande.